Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is David Davis. I'm your presenter for today. And the topic of today's webinar is the 3 steps to securing your HyperV virtual infrastructure. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. We've got a lot of exciting things to talk about related to HyperV security. And so without further delay, let's go ahead and get started. Before we get too far into it, let me just tell you a little bit about myself and my background around virtualization and HyperV. I was an IT manager for many years. We had a data center that had about 100 servers in it at that time, and we had about 80 remote locations, and we were the central data center for all processing for the company. So it was there that I gained a lot of my experience and really my passion for virtualization when we had a very successful consolidation project in the data center. And it was at that time I started writing and teaching around virtualization. And since then, I've created over 20 different courses for pluralsight.com, almost all around virtualization. And some of those are on HyperV as well. So I've put HyperV through its paces. I've worked with companies helping them with their HyperV infrastructure as well. I'm a 6-time VMware vExpert, VMware VCP. I have a number of Microsoft certifications, and I blog at virtualizationsoftware.com. And you can always find me on Twitter as David M. Davis. If you have questions afterwards or you want to follow me, feel free to send me questions over there at any time. So with that, let's go ahead and get started talking about HyperV security. So the first point here that I want to bring up is that HyperV default security just isn't going to cut it. It's not enough. And what I mean by that is, let's say you take a Windows server, you install the HyperV role on there, and then, if you take advantage of what's included in that operating system, when it comes to network security, of course, you have the local Windows firewall. And the local Windows firewall is, a basic firewall. It's good for some things, but it doesn't have any virtualization awareness. It doesn't know anything about, the virtual infrastructure, that there's virtual machines running on top, what those virtual machines say their names are, and what kind of traffic is going in and out of them. It has no connectivity to that virtual network at all. So it's not going to protect guest virtual machines, and when it comes to protecting the host, it can provide some basic network security. But again, if you have many HyperV hosts, there's no single point of monitoring. There's no single point of management for all those Windows firewalls. So it's a very inefficient way, I would say, to try to protect your HyperV hosts. And then when it comes to antivirus and anti-malware for the HyperV hosts as well, Microsoft offers no built-in protection. They do recommend that you install firewall, intrusion detection, and antivirus solutions in their security best practices, but they don't provide any recommendations as for third-party tools, and only very basic recommendations like the Windows firewall. Now, in their security best practices guide, which I'll talk about more in a little bit, they do have a complex series of security configurations that they recommend on the host and guest systems. Many of those are, can be time-consuming to implement, and some of them, of course, I do recommend that you implement. Others, you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons. But in just a few minutes here, I'll be sharing with you my HyperV security best practice recommendations that I think will make your life easier than trying to follow their long list of complex configurations for best practices. Moving from the host to the guest, when it comes to securing your guest virtual machines, of course, Microsoft still recommends you, if it's the Windows operating system, configure a firewall, antivirus, and intrusion detection on critical production machines, of course. But the only thing they provide to do that is the local Windows firewall, again, which must be configured per virtual machine. So, if you can imagine having, say 30 virtual machines on average per host and, 30 hosts, you're talking about many local Windows firewalls, that must be configured and monitored, and that's very difficult to do. So, the other downside here is that the virtual firewall is not, virtualization aware. So if you want to create a rule, let's say between, one virtual machine and another virtual machine, of course it's all based on, IP address and host name. And, things change, rapidly, in virtualization. You really need something that's virtualization aware. And so without a single point of monitoring and management, for all these, guest virtual machine firewalls, it's going to be pretty tough to, provide network security for all your guest virtual machines. Then when it comes to antivirus and anti-malware, Microsoft doesn't provide, any tool to do that. And they don't provide any real recommendations as to third parties. Of course, there's many third parties out there that will sell you antivirus and anti-malware tools that run, traditionally on top of physical servers and that you can install inside virtual machines. But those tools, again, aren't virtualization aware. And what's going to happen in many cases is you'll end up with, antivirus storms, where if you have 30, virtual machines running on a host, let's say, potentially all of those virtual machines could start scanning at one time. It creates a real CPU heavy load. It can create, a lot of I/O bottlenecks because it's all those agents are accessing the disk all at the same time. And it can be very difficult to try to, control those antivirus storms and schedule those. So antivirus solutions that, run on guests, in my opinion, are very poor choices for protecting, your HyperV infrastructure. It's just a waste of, valuable server resources, and it's going to reduce your consolidation ratios, across the HyperV infrastructure. So you won't be able to get as many virtual machines, on a host as you could, otherwise, since if you weren't running those types of in-guest antivirus tools. And then the last point I want to make here on why default HyperV security isn't enough is that those Windows guest virtual machines must still be protected. I think many admins get sort of a false sense of security that when they move a virtual machine, from a physical server, they virtualize it and they bring it into HyperV, let's say, that those virtual machines have some, sort of umbrella protection from the hypervisor, and that's simply not the case. They have no more protection than they did when they were physical servers. And, according to Microsoft's best practices, they say, you must still configure antivirus, firewall, intrusion detection within your virtual machines, based on, of course, the appropriate server role. So Microsoft says you must still provide security. However, they don't really provide any, solid ways to protect those virtual machines other than the very basic, let's say Windows firewall. So you need to make sure that your virtual machines and hosts, are all protected across multiple layers, providing multiple layers, of security. Then when it comes to virtualization, I want to point out that, in my opinion, securing your virtual infrastructure, is even more important than securing your physical infrastructure. The reasons for that are really multifaceted. The first one is that you've got, high-density servers. So you're consolidating your virtual machines, and you're trying to increase that consolidation ratio as much as possible. So, if you can, you'll really consolidate as many virtual machines on a host as possible, right? As much CPU, memory, and disk I/O capacity that you have, you'll want to use that to maximize, your server investment. So you have many more eggs, if you will, in one basket. And if you were to lose one of those baskets, as the saying goes, you're going to lose all the eggs inside. So the point here is to secure your HyperV infrastructure even more so, than you did your physical, HyperV infrastructure. The next point I want to make is that when it comes to virtualization, it's so much easier to provision new virtual machines. So what I mean by this is you can easily clone virtual machines. You can provision virtual machines from template. You can download virtual machines, from the internet and deploy these virtual appliances, in many cases within minutes. So the virtual machine sprawl happens so much more quickly, in the virtual infrastructure than it did with the physical infrastructure. And what that does in many cases is it just creates more, potential security holes, more exposure points where a malicious attacker could get in. So if you were to clone a virtual machine that had, that didn't have any firewall, that didn't have any protection, you clone that virtual machine 10 times, well, you have 10 more, times the security holes, or attack points, if you will, in your data center, all thanks to the ease of, deploying virtual machines in the virtual infrastructure. Another reason to secure your infrastructure, your virtual infrastructure, even more so than your physical, is that what happens at most companies is perhaps they do have some security tools to secure their physical server infrastructure. They might have firewalls, intrusion detection, and so forth. But when they virtualize their physical servers, turn them into virtual machines, those virtual machines are now talking on the virtual network, which is a completely different network than the physical network. And these physical network tools, in most cases, aren't able to completely monitor the virtual network as they did the physical network. So what this does is it creates blind spots where a lot of traffic is happening, could be malicious attacks happening on the virtual network that the traditional physical server security tools don't even know anything about. So that's why another reason it's important to secure the virtual network, from the start to ensure that, the entire HyperV infrastructure is going to be protected. And then finally, dynamic IT loads. In HyperV infrastructure, you've got, things like live migration where virtual machines are moving from host to host dynamically. In many cases, not all the admins know about it. The security, personnel, they don't know about it. So there's this ever-changing security posture, if you will, where virtual machines are being, brought online, offline, and moving about, more so than they ever did before with a physical server infrastructure. So because of this, very dynamic, changing virtual infrastructure and really a dynamic data center, as we move towards 100% consolidation in the data center, you've got so many more reasons than ever before to ensure that your HyperV infrastructure is secure from day one. So I said I'd talk about best practices for securing HyperV, and I talked about how Microsoft has a security best practices guide, which is a great document. It is lengthy. It's over 50 pages. I counted 12 different recommendations for securing HyperV hosts and 7 different recommendations for securing HyperV guest virtual machines. And many of these are, they're not just single checkbox you can just go in and enable. They are fairly, complicated in many cases to configure. For example, encrypting, certain types of network traffic, putting, certain types of traffic on different networks completely, using SSL, using different forms of, authentication. So they can be rather complex to implement. I suspect, most HyperV infrastructures haven't implemented, by any means all of these. It's good to, handpick the ones that you feel are most important to you and to your company, and to use those, as needed. You can go check out the documentation. There is the URL, and again, it's got some good recommendations. But I do have my list of, my own personal HyperV security best practices, and I'd like to share those with you because I believe they can help to make your life, easier instead of trying to follow, perhaps every one of these HyperV security best practices. So here's my list, and it's just 5 different, recommendations. And not all of these are configurations. Many of them are approaches or recommendations as to how you should think about your infrastructure and your security. And the first one is implement an additional layers of HyperV security. And what I mean by that is don't just accept the defaults, and don't just utilize the basic tools that Microsoft provides you. Even go beyond the security best practices in their guide in many cases by utilizing additional tools and implementing security in layers, which I'll talk about in just a second. By implementing things like firewall, antivirus, intrusion detection, different forms of security that are going to protect your HyperV infrastructure at different layers. You'll be so much more secure. Number two is adopting host-based security tools. So I talked about the difference between host-based and guest-based security tools. And the idea here is where the security actions are taking place. Where is, let's say, antivirus scanning taking place? By utilizing host-based security tools and HyperV infrastructures, you're going to be so much more efficient in terms of reducing server load, both CPU and disk I/O, than you would with in guest-based tools. And it's also a point of scalability, management, and so forth. So host-based security tools are the way to go. Number three is utilize tools that are centrally managed. Of course, you want a centralized management console for hopefully not just one of the aspects of security, but all of the aspects of security that you're implementing, all of the layers of security, a firewall, antivirus, anti-malware, and so forth. If you can have these all in a single console for the entire HyperV infrastructure, and maybe one day if you could get to 100% virtualization with HyperV, you'd have a single security console for the entire data center. And what a great world that would be, right? So centrally managed tools, of course, are the way to go. And then compliance. Whether or not you're affected by compliance, you have legal requirements that ensure that your company is compliant or not, you want to make sure that you personally have compliance in place. So you have log files that prove that your HyperV infrastructure is secure, and you have log files that prove what traffic is allowed, what traffic is denied, who tried to get in at that point, and why their traffic was denied. So, and then besides compliance, number 5 here, the last point I want to make is, don't get stuck with a false sense of security. So if you, I think many companies, they implement, let's say, a firewall, and then they say, okay, we're secure now, and they don't think about security in layers, that, oh, there's multiple ways to attack any sort of network or any sort of server infrastructure, and that, let's say a firewall isn't going to just protect everything. It's not the silver bullet. There is no silver bullet, by the way, for security. And that's why security in layers is so important, because there's multiple attack points to every, infrastructure. So speaking about security in layers, if you're not familiar with the concept or the term, this graphic is actually from Intel.com. And what it talks about here is, the concept of security in layers, that you need to have multiple layers of security, just like a castle, right? If someone's trying to, attack a castle, that castle is going to have multiple layers of security. They're not going to just have, one chain link fence around the whole castle. They're going to have, starting off with a big wall, a smaller wall, multiple, archers, let's say, that are going to attack you. Then finally the castle, gates, and then the castle, the man trap and the doors. And so there's multiple layers of security in that, and that's the type of, multiple layers of security that you need in your HyperV infrastructure as well. So, antivirus, firewalls, intrusion detection, then monitoring, logging, all these things need to be in place in the HyperV infrastructure. Just the same as they would in a physical server infrastructure, but as I talked about, it's just so much more important in a virtual infrastructure because you've consolidated all your servers and you have, a much more valuable, much more dense infrastructure, that needs to be protected. I talked about implementing additional layers of HyperV security. So the best way to do that, the smartest way by far, is for those tools to leverage what they call the HyperV Extensible switch. So the Extensible switch, you can think of it as hooks for third-party tools to get into, let's say, the HyperV network and basically have full access to it, based on whatever you control or whatever you configure with that tool. But the point is here is you have a virtual firewall, let's say, that uses the HyperV Extensible switch. It can see all the traffic traversing across the virtual network. It can do deep packet inspection, stateful, firewall. It can throttle the traffic, so slow it down. It can block traffic, allow traffic, log the traffic. It can have essentially full access to the virtual network. And as I talked about, when you move from physical servers to the virtual network, you, in many cases, create that blind spot where traditional physical network security tools, aren't able to see anymore. So by leveraging the HyperV Extensible switch, your security tools will have full access to provide all of these services. So make sure whatever tool you choose that it leverages the Extensible switch. Another best practice I said that you should implement is to use host-based security tools. And what I mean by that is, particularly in the case of antivirus and anti-malware software, many companies are still using in-guest antivirus agents that run inside their virtual machines in the HyperV infrastructure, and they just really move that concept, that approach, from their traditional physical servers when they virtualized. So, while this might appear to work, it's not the smart move. It's not the best way to implement antivirus, and it's not the most efficient way. The most efficient way is going to utilize, again, the HyperV Extensible switch and run antivirus and anti-malware on the host, and then scan those virtual machine disk files on a schedule all in one place, so that it's not the virtual machines that are doing the work, it's the host that's doing the work. And you're doing it once instead of doing it once for every virtual machine that's running on that host. So logically, you can think about it, you're doing so much less work. This is reducing the CPU and I/O load on your host and allowing you to run more virtual machines. So you're getting a higher virtual machine or host to VM consolidation ratio, and you're getting more for your money, which is what virtualization is all about. So just to summarize the difference here between host-based versus in-guest tools, greater performance efficiency, and I'm sure the guys at Five9, they have some statistics that show that instead of running a virtual machine antivirus solution in-guest by running it on the host, you're going to save a tremendous amount of host CPU and disk I/O performance, which is going to equate back to real dollars. Higher virtual machine density, ease of management. So a single pane of glass, you're managing many more fewer agents, and you have many more fewer agents to install, really. Greater control, and then scalability. It's going to allow you to scale your HyperV infrastructure more than you ever could before. So host-based versus guest-based. Host-based is always going to be the way to go for HyperV infrastructure in terms of securing your antivirus or protecting you from antivirus. And then ensuring compliance. Of course, companies that process credit cards, they're affected by PCI requirements. Companies that store healthcare data are affected by HIPAA requirements. Companies that are public are affected by Sarbanes-Oxley and other regulations. So whether or not you're affected by these types of regulations, you still need to ensure compliance, but if you are affected by these, then you're absolutely required to ensure that you're compliant. And there's multiple ways to ensure compliance. It's back to that security and layers where, let's say the hosts that have, credit card data, they need intrusion detection systems that can log who gets in and who doesn't get in to access that data. Of course, you need the security policy. You need centralized logging, for all these types of security solutions. You need virtual firewall to protect virtual machines that store credit card data, for example. And then you want to use, antivirus and anti-malware scanning across all the hosts to ensure that a particular virtual machine doesn't, get infected, let's say, with a virus, and then is a compromised virtual machine that then performs attacks on, other virtual machines, for example. So ensuring compliance is always going to be important when it comes to protecting your Hyper-V infrastructure. And now I'd like to move on to the 3 steps that I recommend you take for utilizing for protecting your Hyper-V infrastructure. And the first one is utilizing a virtual firewall within Hyper-V. And there's a number of different scenarios here on this graphic. You'll see 2 of those scenarios. The first one is, let's say that you have a virtual machine or a group of virtual machines that you want to keep private. For example, off the public network, off of your production network, they just need to be isolated. So you can isolate one, or groups of virtual machines. For example, let's say you have developers that are running test transactions, and they have their own, let's say DNS and Active Directory infrastructure over there. You don't want that on your production infrastructure. So you can create, rules with a virtual firewall in Hyper-V to isolate, one or groups of virtual machines. You can even say this virtual machine can never talk to that virtual machine, or this virtual machine can only talk, to that virtual machine. And then log, of course, traffic that's allowed and traffic that's denied as well. Another common scenario with a virtual firewall would be to create application groups. So you say, okay, these are all my web servers, and these are my database servers, and the web servers can only talk to the database servers and only on, for example, these particular ports. And no traffic from the internet or other virtual machines should ever be talking directly to the database servers, because in a traditional 2-tier web application here, the web servers really only need to talk to the database servers to present that information to clients through a web browser. So setting up these application groups is very common, and then securing the network based on the types of applications and who needs to talk to who. Another common scenario would be you're really just filtering traffic to and from a virtual machine, securing a virtual machine. So if you have a web server, really what traffic needs to be going to that web server? Maybe it's just port 80 and 443. That's it. And then you want to log traffic that's outside of that, that's perhaps a malicious attack. And of course, this is even more important for servers that are internet-facing or servers that are on a DMZ. This is especially important for service providers, companies that have different divisions and groups, or colleges, universities that might have, let's say, visitors or students that might open up the attack surface, if you will. So there's so many different scenarios here, really, where you need a virtual firewall for Hyper-V. To me, it's just logical that you're going to need to protect your Hyper-V infrastructure, and the Windows firewall is just absolutely inadequate to do so. So again, this is a host-based firewall that's running on the Hyper-V host. It's utilizing the virtual switch extension so that there's no agents or software or anything to install in the guest virtual machines. So this is, for example, what it would look like if you were using Five9 Cloud Security, which provides that virtual firewall capability as well as intrusion detection and antivirus. So on the left-hand side, you've got your host and virtual machine inventory here, and as virtual machines move with a live migration, they would move from host to host, and the tool would recognize that and accommodate for that. And then you can create rules based on those virtual machine names. So those rules would then follow that virtual machine as it moves from host to host, and you could create a rule so that one virtual machine can only talk to another virtual machine, and so forth, utilizing the HyperV virtual machine names, not just host names or IP addresses. But then you can, of course, also create rules based on host names, IP addresses, port names, all sorts of network traffic that you would find in a full, traditional network firewall. So this can be done on the virtual network, and again, it's all host-based, and it's centrally controlled from one console. So not only do you have the firewall tab there that you see, then there's also intrusion detection and antivirus. And then you see we selected one virtual machine, and you can see the log, the firewall log there of the traffic that's been allowed and the traffic that's been denied. So you have this audit trail, this logging that's going to help you, of course, with your compliance. So moving on, besides for virtual firewall, step number 2, in my opinion, is to implement agentless antivirus scanning for HyperV. So if you want to protect your virtual infrastructure against security and layers, you've got a virtual firewall that's protecting the network. Now you need to protect the operating systems, if you will, from antivirus, anti-malware, all forms of attack, really, that are going to run as processes, or code inside the operating system. So the old way would be to run the agents on top of each virtual machine, but as I talked about, that's inefficient. It's going to slow your performance. It's wasting your resources and reducing your consolidation ratio. So the new way would be to use agentless antivirus, which is really only possible thanks to HyperV, right? We've got a centralized host that's running multiple virtual machines, and then we've got this extensible switch that we can use to scan the virtual machine traffic, and then all the virtual machines are stored in a single place, so you can easily schedule to scan those virtual machine disk files for malicious code and virus signatures. So just a comparison here, I talked about how centralized or host-based antivirus scanning is more efficient and it's a better performance solution. If you were to perform a full scan on a traditional antivirus or a virtual machine that's running traditional in-guest antivirus software, it could take 40 minutes on up to several hours and eat up a lot of CPU and I/O off of that costly server basis compared to guest virtual machine, or I'm sorry, compared to host-based virtual machine scanning here. It can take really just seconds to a handful of minutes to do that same type of scan thanks to change block tracking. So what the host-based antivirus solution can do is actually track the blocks of the virtual machine disk file that have changed. And so when an incremental scan happens, which is going to happen every time after the first full scan, it's only going to take a few seconds. So this is going to tremendously reduce the time that it takes to perform antivirus scanning across all of your virtual machines. So if we look at some log files here, you can see the scanning times. So this is what you want to see after your first full scan. The incremental scans just take a handful of seconds here. And on the right-hand side, you see the logs, the number of objects that were scanned, the number of blocks that were scanned there, and then this is where you would see it inside the interface. So it's a central console for all of your antivirus scanning across the entire HyperV infrastructure. So in this case, we're just looking at one of the virtual machines and its antivirus scan. But you could, of course, analyze all the virtual machines. You can schedule the scan for all the virtual machines in a single interface, a single pane of glass. So step 3, we talked about virtual firewall. We talked about host-based antivirus. Step 3 is agentless intrusion detection. So what I mean by this is, for example, let's say you have a web server and you're concerned about malicious attacks on that web server. Intrusion detection works more at the application level. So it can actually analyze the network traffic, a malicious attack happens. So here you see the log file, again, on the same centralized single pane of glass, and you can implement agentless intrusion detection. So you don't have to install any agents inside, let's say, all of your web servers to protect them. You can do it in a single place with a single application. So those are the 3 steps. Besides my 5 best practices, these are the 3 steps that I believe can really make the life of a HyperV administrator so much easier and really make a HyperV infrastructure so much more secure. Virtual firewall, antivirus, and intrusion detection, all in a host-based implementation. So no in-guest agents, and all managed from a single interface. So I want to talk just briefly here about our sponsor, Five9. Five9 and their cloud security product for HyperV is being used by many enterprises, across the company, service providers, and other vendors as well. Service providers, large enterprises, small enterprises, really companies of all sizes, to provide the agentless, host-based antivirus, virtual firewall, and intrusion detection. And I'm not going to go into every one of these features here. You can read more on their website. You can download evaluations as well, and try it out in your own HyperV infrastructure. It's relatively very easy to install. I've installed it in my own lab, and it can be installed in I would say about 10 minutes roughly is what it took me. So I've talked about my recommendations for best practices, my recommendations for the steps you should take to secure your HyperV infrastructure. And now we've got roughly 15 minutes left. I'd like to open this up for questions. You can use your GoToMeeting chat box right there. You can type in your question. And I'm joined by Alexander from Five9 Software. And he is an expert really on HyperV security and utilizing these types of tools. So I'm glad to answer your question as well as Alexander. And so with that, let me go to the question box here and see what we've got. Let's see, we've got a number of questions that have already been answered here.
So let me step in. Thank you for introducing me, David. We have a few questions that we can probably go over right now, just via voice, because it may be an interest for everyone. So there is a question about Five9, if it works for VMware or HyperV only. So that's actually a very important point of Five9. We are purely focused on Microsoft virtualization. And actually, this is the way it gives us a wonderful opportunity to have a very strong partnership with Microsoft and to deliver the best available architecture for HyperV. So the product was and is being built purely for HyperV, so there is no VMware support plan for that. Okay?
Great info.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's see, another question here, Alexander, is how does this compare to using Microsoft System Center? And of course, System Center is a huge suite, of a lot of different things: virtualization management, operations management, configurations management. But Alexander, what does it offer in the way of security?
And that Microsoft System Center offering allows you to perform some of the security operations on your environment, but except of the pricing, I mean, I'm not going to touch that right now. So Five9 offers the only agentless solution to do the security part. So antivirus, agentless antivirus part is available only within Five9 Cloud Security product in this case. So Microsoft System Center won't let you do that. And actually, we're working with Microsoft on including 5.9 Cloud Security, the most recent version, into System Center Virtual Machine Manager. And they're all for it. They would like to have such a solution in System Center Virtual Machine Management as well. There is a plugin version that you can also download and install. It's for version 3 of our security product. But it can give you an idea of what kind of integration we have there. Obviously, it is a GUI integration into the System Center VMM. And actually, it becomes a really very solid solution along with System Center.
Yeah, great info. So if you already have System Center, there really isn't an agentless offering in there, but you guys have a plugin that integrates into System Center to manage 5.9 Cloud Security and do all these same things that we're talking about here within the System Center interface. Did I understand that right?
You're absolutely correct, David. At this point, standalone version is a bit ahead of System Center VMM plugin version, but we are going to update it this year to have all the functionality presented in standalone version in that version as well. So actually they work really well together. So just don't be afraid to use System Center VMM and the 5.9 Cloud Security standalone as two separate management utilities. That actually works really well, and as you could see, interface is very straightforward, so there are no complications in there. We tried to make it simple.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's a question here about is there a 5.9 certification? I've not heard of such a thing at this point, but that sounds very cool for the future. Am I right?
At this point, actually, we have a few of our partners certified. So there's a certification for our partners, obviously, because you need to know the product to offer it to your customers. So please contact us. We are info@5.9.com, and we can schedule the certification and the learning part for you. So we definitely need to know what kind of projects you're working on right now. And depending on that, we'll deliver training for you and get you the certificate that you need to install it on your client's infrastructures.
Okay, so it's a certification for partners, but not one for end user.
Correct, yeah. Yes.
Okay. And then what about licensing and pricing? How is cloud security licensed?
5.9 Cloud Security is licensed per 2 CPUs, so it's actually very close to Microsoft licensing. There are 3 actual models. You know that Microsoft has 2 of them, standard and data center. We added one in the middle. That's called Enterprise. So standard license is $199, and it covers up to 6 virtual machines per 2 CPU. So the enterprise license is $499 US per year for up to 20 virtual machines on 2 CPUs, and the data center license is the same as Microsoft, so it covers a limited number of virtual machines per 2 CPUs. So this is the way we license it at this moment. If you're a cloud hosting provider, a service provider, there is also a special offering for that kind of customers, so please get in touch with us, and we'll be able to offer you an SPLA 1.
Great. Let's see. One of the questions I have for you is, what do you see as the future, of 5.9 Cloud Security? I know I don't want to go into any NDA things here, but I know you guys continue to innovate, more and more. What's going to come in the future, if you can share any of that with us?
Yeah, so we are going to make 5.9 Cloud Security the most comprehensive security solution for HyperV. And as you could notice already, so it has 3 main components that you really need to leverage to secure the HyperV system, and the virtual firewall and antivirus and IDS. So all of these are very, very important to maintain the security level high. So what we are going to do here, we are going to actually expand some of the functionality. So we are going to keep our architecture as the best fit for virtualization as we have it right now. So we are going to have some usability improvements for sure. So we are going to have it as easy, for every single type of user, so you can even share it and give the management of some of that to your, most not experienced customer, because right now we just included the multi-tenancy part, and multi-tenancy actually allows your customers, for example, if you're a cloud hosting provider, to manage their own cloud security instance for their virtual machines only. The very nearby plan is to offer the AgentPack integration. You know that Windows AgentPack is the great way of providing self-service portals inside the organization. And right now, 5.9 Cloud Security is being integrated in there. We already announced that on WPC, and you can actually go and register for the preview version. So once it becomes available, we'll send you the very first version of Windows AgentPack integration, so you can be one of the very first ones to check it out. So these are the nearby plans, and actually we are going also to offer the updated version of 5.9 Cloud Security. I believe that's going to happen next week, and there's also a new version, a brand new version coming out with connection stable improvement. That's going to be available probably sometime in September.
Very cool. Very cool. A lot of exciting stuff out there. And we don't have a lot of time left, but I'm curious, can you share with us any stories about your, customers who have successfully implemented cloud security? I mean, what types of, the size of HyperV infrastructure, have you seen utilizing cloud security?
Actually, the sizes of the infrastructures really are very, very different. We have seen customers running 12 virtual machines and successfully using 5.9 Cloud Security, and we have customers using several thousands of virtual machines and successfully protecting them with cloud security as well. So the usage scenarios are so different, so everyone has to protect HyperV system, HyperV infrastructures, and as you mentioned in the very beginning of today's webinar, so obviously the HyperV default security is inadequate, and you really need to have this extra layers of security, and but you still want to keep them efficient, right? So that's why we made all of this available in an agentless manner. So and Agentless Antivirus and Agentless Firewall and IDEA. So these are equally important to have in your HyperV infrastructure. So multiple projects, cloud hosting projects, enterprise customers, small medium business, so everyone needs that. Unfortunately, I can't probably tell you specific names of our customers at this moment, so you can check the ones that are available on our website. Other ones not really sharing this information publicly, but I can tell you, so these are very wide range, so whatever environment and infrastructure you have, 5.9 Cloud Security will perfectly fit your needs.
Excellent. And then one final question came in here while we were talking, and I think it's a really good question, is are there any differences in, the security functionality that we saw with cloud security here if you're using the full Windows Server 2012 R2 versus running HyperV Server 2012, like the free edition?
Absolutely no differences. As you know, HyperV role is the same on whether you run it on a full-featured Windows Server or HyperV Server standalone. So that's all in it. So all the functionality you get is absolutely the same. So you can be easily using the free version of HyperV with your already licensed virtual machines there, and you can easily leverage 5.9 Cloud Security for that as well. And by the way, Yeah, just one thing. By the way, if you're using the core version of HyperV, I encourage you to check out Finance Manager for HyperV. It actually is a great tool for managing big environments as well, because it's for its clusters management. It has a few monitoring functionalities built in, login, and best practices. So Finance Manager actually is very helpful for big environments, but for the ones that are running on the core, it's actually irreplaceable. You just need to have it because it gives you the convenient graphical user interface on your core Hyper-V servers.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've written a number of articles about Five9 Manager and how it's really a very great low-cost alternative, for System Center for companies that say can't afford System Center or don't need all the functionality. Maybe they just need VMM. They can use Five9 Manager and get really all that functionality, as you said, even if they're just using Server Core or the free edition of Hyper-V. And then back to the point about limitations on the security functionality related to the free version of Hyper-V versus the full version. I've seen a lot of companies that are implementing VDI use the free version of Hyper-V. I've seen a lot of service providers use the free version of Hyper-V, and then they can still use, say, Five9 Cloud Security on top of that to, ensure that their Hyper-V infrastructure is secure. So with that, looks like we've reached the end of the webinar. We've reached the end of our time slot here. I really appreciate everyone joining us today. And if you have questions about cloud security, there's the URL right there you can go to. If you'd like your own personal product demo, you can email info@five9.com. Alexander, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. We'll keep our questions box running for probably another 5 minutes. So if you have some questions remaining, please go ahead and put them in. And we'll just keep answering some of them via text now. Okay, so please stay in the chat box if you have questions remaining, okay?
Excellent. Thanks, Alexander, and thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thank you. Goodbye.